Okay, so you want to own an RV storage facility, 5 acres on a road just outside town, a fence around the perimeter, a gate with a keypad, gravel across the whole thing, and lines painted out in long rectangles, 240 spaces. No building, no plumbing, no employees. You mow the edges twice a year and collect $100 a month from every rectangle. That's the picture. And of everything in this series, it is the closest to true. There genuinely is no building. The operating costs genuinely are minimal. This is the simplest physical business we've looked at. So here's the problem. Stand at the fence and look in. You see cheap land with a fence around it and vehicles parked on it. It looks like the lowest effort real estate business that exists. Buy dirt, add a fence, collect rent. And that description is accurate, which is exactly why it misleads, because it tells you what you're providing. It tells you nothing about why anybody is paying for it. Nobody stores an RV because they lack space. Almost every one of your tenants owns a house with a driveway, and that driveway is empty, and their 40-foot motorhome is sitting on your gravel 4 miles away. They are not choosing you over their driveway. They are legally prohibited from their driveway, which means an RV storage facility is not really a storage business. It is a compliance business. Your customer has a problem created by a rule, and you are the cheapest lawful place to put that problem. Every number in this business descends from that one fact, including several that make no sense until you see it. Let's start with what it costs to open, because the fence is not the expensive part. There isn't one kind of RV storage. There are about 6, and the gap between the cheapest and the most expensive is enormous. At the bottom is uncovered gravel, a fenced lot, a compacted aggregate surface, painted or staked spaces, a gate, lowest cost per space by a wide margin, lowest rate, and the format most exposed to every risk we'll discuss. Above that, uncovered paved. Same layout, asphalt or concrete instead of gravel. Considerably more expensive to build, and the reason why is not durability. We'll come back to it. Then covered storage, a steel canopy on posts over the spaces. This protects the single most expensive thing about owning an RV, which is what sunlight and hail do to a roof and to rubber seals. Covered spaces command meaningfully higher rates than uncovered, often half again as much or more. Then fully enclosed, individual drive-in units, effectively oversized garages with roll-up doors, sized for a 40-foot vehicle. Highest rate, highest construction cost, and now you are back to being a building business. Then, indoor climate controlled, which exists for collector vehicles and high-end coaches, and is a different customer entirely. And then the co-located model, where RV and boat spaces sit around the perimeter of a conventional self-storage site, using land that would otherwise be a setback or a buffer. That one isn't really a business. It's a way of monetizing leftover geometry. Each of these answers the same question differently. Are you renting dirt or are you renting protection? That decision sets your rate, your build cost, and your customer. And once the site is graded, you have largely answered it. Now here's where the mental model breaks down. You think the expensive part is the land and the fence. The fence is trivial, the land is significant, but the line that kills projects sits between them. And it is not a line most people have heard of. It's the ground, not the price of the ground, what the jurisdiction requires you to do to it. Start with the entitlement, because RV storage may be the least popular thing a planning commission is ever asked to approve. It generates almost no sales tax, creates essentially no jobs, and from the road it looks like a yard full of large vehicles, which is precisely the thing the neighboring town banned from driveways in the first place. That is not a coincidence, and councils are aware of it. So approval frequently arrives loaded with conditions. Solid screening walls or berms along any public frontage. Landscape buffers with irrigation and a maintenance obligation. Height limits on what can be seen above the wall. Setbacks that consume the most valuable part of your parcel. Every one of those conditions removes rentable area or adds cost, and several do both. Then the surface, and this is the deferred cost that catches developers. Gravel looks like the obvious answer. It is dramatically cheaper than paving, and it drains freely. But a compacted aggregate surface under vehicles weighing 15 to 30,000 pounds does not stay flat. It ruts, it migrates, it develops potholes at every turning point, and it needs regrading and replenishment on a cycle. Many jurisdictions also require dust control on unpaved commercial surfaces, and some simply do not permit gravel for commercial vehicle areas at all. So you consider paving. And paving triggers the thing that quietly determines whether the project is viable. Stormwater. Rain that falls on gravel largely soaks in. Rain that falls on asphalt does not. It runs off, fast, all at once. Which means paving converts your site into impervious surface. and impervious surface is regulated. Above a threshold, you are required to detain that runoff on your own land. A retention basin, an underground vault, engineered drainage. That is expensive. And worse, the basin occupies land you are planning to rent. So the paving decision is not a decision about surfaces. It is a decision about how many spaces you are permitted to have. Pave the lot, and you may lose 10 or 15% of your rentable area to a hole in the ground that stores water for 2 hours a year. Add the fence, the gate, the lighting across 5 acres, the camera coverage, the site grading, the surveying, and the engineering. And a 5-acre RV storage development commonly runs $1.5 to $3 million all in, with land often the largest single line, and stormwater engineering frequently the largest surprise. So far, so good. Now let's talk about the geometry, because this is where the business is actually won or lost. A parking space for a car is roughly 9 feet by 18, and the drive aisle serving it is about 24 feet wide. Those numbers are in every zoning code in the country, and everyone knows them. Now park a 40-foot fifth wheel with a truck attached. The vehicle itself needs a space around 12 by 50. But the vehicle cannot turn like a car. A long trailer needs a very wide aisle to swing into a perpendicular space, and it frequently needs to back in, which requires more room again. Aisles in a well-designed RV yard commonly run 35 to 45 feet. Here's why that matters more than anything else on the site. Every foot of aisle is land you pay tax on, insure, light, fence, and maintain, and cannot rent. It generates nothing. So the real number in this business is not acreage. It is the share of your acreage that ends up inside a rentable rectangle. 5 acres is 217,000 square feet. Take out the perimeter setback, the screening buffer, the stormwater basin, the entry apron, and the drive aisles. And a well-laid-out site might convert 55 to 65% of that into rentable space. A badly laid-out site, an awkward parcel, a hard corner, a shape that forces dead-end aisles, might manage 40. Read that again because it is the whole ballgame. 2 identical 5-acre parcels, bought for the same money in the same market, can differ by 60% in how many spaces they hold. Not 60% in rate, 60% in inventory. That difference is permanent. It is set on the day the site plan is drawn, and no amount of good operating fixes it, which is why experienced developers care about parcel shape almost more than parcel size, and why a rectangular 5-acre site with 2 street frontages is worth considerably more than an irregular 7-acre site with 1 awkward access point. Now let's go back to why anybody is paying you at all. Your tenant owns a recreational vehicle. Depending on the type, they will use it somewhere between 2 and 6 weeks a year. For the remaining 46 to 50 weeks, it is an object that has to be somewhere. The obvious somewhere is their own property. They own it. It costs nothing. And in an enormous share of American residential neighborhoods, they are not allowed. 2. Homeowners associations routinely prohibit recreational vehicles from being parked in driveways or visible from the street, sometimes with an exception of 24 or 48 hours for loading. Municipal codes in many places impose similar restrictions independent of any association. Limits on parking oversized vehicles on residential streets, on front setbacks, on unenclosed side yards. So the demand for your gravel was not created by a shortage of space. It was created by a rule written by people who are not your customers, enforced by an entity you have no relationship with in jurisdictions where you do not operate. And that has 3 consequences that shape the entire business. The first is that your trade area is defined by ordinance rather than by distance. The relevant question is not how many people live within 10 miles. It's how many recreational vehicles are owned by households inside jurisdictions that prohibit home parking within a reasonable drive of your gate. 2 subdivisions the same size, 4 miles apart, can represent completely different demand depending on what their covenants say. The second is that you are structurally on the outside. You need cheap land, which means being outside the expensive restrictive municipality. But you need to be close enough that a tenant will drive there, hitch up, and drive back. That corridor, just past the boundary of the restrictive area, is where these facilities cluster, and it is not an accident. The third consequence is the uncomfortable one. Your demand rests on a rule you don't control and can't influence. If a municipality relaxes its parking restrictions, or an association votes to allow screened side yard storage, some portion of your tenant base acquires a free alternative overnight. It is not a common event. It is also not a hypothetical one, and it is the only demand risk in this series that can be voted into existence at a meeting you're not invited to. which raises the question of why tenants stay as long as they do. Because they stay a very long time. Partly, it's the same inertia any storage business runs on. Moving an RV requires hitching, driving something enormous, and finding somewhere else with an available space of the right size, which is a much scarcer commodity than a 10 by 10 unit. But there's something specific to this business underneath. That, and it's worth naming plainly. A recreational vehicle is a purchase people make in order to become a particular kind of person. Someone who travels, who takes the family out, who uses their time differently. Most owners use it far less than they imagine they would. Canceling the storage space means selling the vehicle. And selling the vehicle means formally conceding that the version of your life the purchase represented isn't happening. $130 a month is a very reasonable price for not having that conversation with yourself. That is why RV storage tenancies routinely run for years, and why the depreciating asset sitting on your gravel is very often worth less than the total rent its owner has paid you to keep it there. There's a legal layer here that is genuinely different from ordinary storage, and new owners consistently miss it. In a conventional self-storage facility, if a tenant stops paying, you follow your state's self-storage lien statute, give notice, and eventually sell the contents. That process is well established. An RV is not contents, it is a titled vehicle, which means when an RV is abandoned on your lot, you may not be operating under the self-storage lien statute at all. You may be in the world of vehicle liens, abandoned vehicle procedures, titling agencies, and lien holders. If there's an outstanding loan on it, there is a bank with a recorded interest that has to be dealt with before anything can be sold. And unlike a unit full of furniture, you cannot simply empty it into a skip. You have a 40-foot object occupying a revenue space, frequently with deteriorating tires, sometimes with a leaking roof, occasionally with an engine that no longer starts, and a legal process that can run for months before you are permitted to move it. Experienced operators structure around this deliberately, recording vehicle identification and title details at move-in, requiring proof of insurance and registration, and writing towing and disposal rights into the agreement. So the process starts from a stronger position. Operators who skip that discover the abandoned vehicle process the hard way, one space at a time. There's a security layer too. You are storing assets worth $50,000 to $500,000 apiece, unattended, outdoors, usually on the edge of town. The theft profile is specific. Catalytic converters, batteries, generators, and occasionally the entire vehicle. And your tenants know it. Perimeter fencing, gate access logging, and genuine camera coverage are not amenities in this business. They are the product. Before we get to how these break, there's a structural decision underneath everything. And in this format, it matters more than in any other business we've looked at. Do you own the land or do you lease it? Every other format in this series involves a building. When you lease a building, at least the thing you occupy was already there. Here, the land is the entire asset. And the improvements you make to it are almost worthless if you have to leave. Leasing is enormously attractive at the start. Ground rent on raw acreage outside town is cheap. You avoid the single largest line in the development budget, which drops your capital requirement by half or more, and can take your cash-on-cash return from good to spectacular. On a spreadsheet, leasing looks obviously correct. Look closely at what you are actually building on borrowed ground. You grade it, you compact and surface it. You fence it, light it, run power to it, install a gate system and cameras, dig a stormwater basin, plant a screening buffer, and maintain it for years. Every one of those things is permanently attached to a parcel you do not own, which means at the end of your term, you are negotiating with a landowner who knows two things with certainty: that you cannot take any of it with you, and that your tenants, the least mobile customers in the storage industry, cannot easily follow you somewhere else. Owning costs far more and produces a worse-looking return in year 1. What it buys is the right to be there in year 20, and, critically, the right to capture what happens to the land itself. That second part is not a footnote. In this business, the ground frequently appreciates faster than the operation grows, and an owner who understands that is running two assets at once: a modest cash-flowing yard and a piece of land in the path of development. A tenant on a ground lease is running one, and it expires. Both routes work. They just end very differently, and the ending is scheduled in the document you sign at the beginning. Now let's talk about how these facilities actually break, because the most common way is one almost nobody plans. 4. Consider a well-run facility on the edge of a growing metropolitan area. 5 acres, full, waiting list, rates raised twice in 3 years. By every operating measure, it is excellent. And that is precisely the problem. because the thing that made it excellent, a growing metro pushing outward toward it, is also the thing that changes what the land underneath it is worth. RV storage is a low-intensity use of land. It generates modest revenue per acre compared with almost anything that gets built on a commercial corridor. When the development frontier arrives, the parcel becomes worth more as apartments, as a distribution building, as retail, than it will ever be worth as gravel with vehicles on it. If you own the land, that is a windfall. And it is genuinely how many of these projects are intended to end. If you lease the land, it is an eviction with extra steps. Your improvements, the grading, the fence, the lighting, the paving, the stormwater vault, are attached to somebody else's dirt. And your tenants, being the least mobile customers in the storage industry, cannot simply be relocated. Here's the structural observation, because it's the real lesson. In most of the businesses in this series, the danger is that the operation stops working. In RV storage, the most likely ending is that the operation keeps working perfectly and becomes the wrong use of the ground it sits on. You can be evicted by success, someone else's. The second failure mode is simpler and more ordinary. Barriers to entry here are lower than in almost any other storage format. There is no building. If somebody can get 5 acres entitled within your trade area, they can be open in months, and every space they add competes directly with yours on a product that is genuinely undifferentiated. Gravel is gravel, which is why covered storage matters more than it looks. It is the only durable way to be something other than the cheapest rectangle. So let's do the math plainly. Take 5 acres, developed uncovered on gravel, converting 60% of the parcel to rentable area. That's about 130,000 square feet of rentable space. At an average space of 12 by 45, 540 square feet. That's roughly 240 spaces. At an average rate of $110 a month, full occupancy would produce about $317,000 a year. At a realistic 90%, call it $285,000. Against that, operating costs, property tax, insurance, gate and management software, camera and alarm monitoring, lighting and power, weed and surface maintenance, gravel replenishment, snow clearing where relevant, part-time labor and marketing. In a business with no building and no plumbing, that lands around 30 to 35% of revenue. Call it $95,000. That leaves roughly $190,000 of net operating income. Against an all-in development cost of, say, $2 million, that's a yield on cost around 9.5%, which is strong and stronger than most self-storage development pencils at today. Now the debt, $1.3 million at current commercial rates on a 25-year amortization, runs somewhere around $108,000 a year. 190 minus 108 leaves about $82,000 of cash flow on $700,000 of your own equity. Call it a 12% cash return from an asset that requires an owner on site a few hours a month. That is a genuinely good business, and it explains the wave of development in this format over the past decade. Now watch what the geometry does to it. Run that identical analysis on a parcel that converts 40% instead of 60. Same acreage, same price, same market, same rates. You now have 160 spaces instead of 240. Revenue falls to $190,000. Operating costs barely move because you are still fencing, lighting, insuring, and paying tax on all 5 acres. Net operating income drops to about $115,000 against the same debt service. The project goes from 12% cash on cash to roughly 1. Nothing about the operation changed. The shape of the parcel changed, which is why the operators who do best treat the rate on a bare space as a floor rather than a business. Covered storage is the largest single upgrade available. A steel canopy is the one improvement that meaningfully changes what the customer is buying. Sun and hail are what destroy an RV roof, and owners know it. Covered spaces routinely command 50% more than uncovered, sometimes considerably more, on the same footprint of land you already own. Then the services that exploit the one moment your customer is guaranteed to be on site. They arrive to hitch up before a trip and return afterward. That is the moment to sell a dump station, a wash bay, potable water, a battery tender power outlet, propane, or a pre-trip inspection. Then bay rental to a mobile RV technician who works on your tenants' vehicles in your yard, on land already fenced and already lit. Then the adjacent inventory: boats, trailers, work vehicles, fleet parking. The same rectangle serves them, and demand for oversized parking is broader than recreational vehicles alone. None of it is glamorous. Together, it can add 15 to 25% to the top line on land you already own. And more importantly, it converts a completely undifferentiated product into one a competitor 4 miles away cannot immediately replicate. Let's put a full year on the table both ways. The good year. You're stabilized at 94%. You convert a third of your spaces to covered, and the upgrade is absorbed at a 50% premium with almost no attrition. Because the tenants who care about a roof were already asking for one. A dump station and a wash bay add modest but genuine revenue. Rates rise 4% across the board. Revenue reaches $360,000. Operating costs hold at $105,000. That's $255,000 of net operating income against $108,000 of debt service. And an asset a buyer will price on covered inventory and long tenancy. The bad year. Someone entitles 5 acres 2 exits down and opens with an introductory rate 30% below yours. Your uncovered spaces are exactly as good as theirs because gravel is gravel. So the price-sensitive third of your tenants begins to move. It takes 11 months because moving an RV is a chore, but they move. Meanwhile, your gravel needs a full regrade. Insurance renews higher, and the county reassesses the parcel upward because the corridor is developing. Occupancy settles at 78%. Revenue falls to $230,000. Costs rise to $115,000. Net operating income of $115,000 against $108,000 of debt service. You are one bad quarter from writing checks on a lot that looks completely full from the road. Because 78% occupancy on a gravel yard is visually indistinguishable from 94. The gap between those 2 years is $140,000 of income. And once a buyer applies a capitalization rate to it, close to $2 million of value. Same dirt, same fence, same vehicles. So if you build one, understand what you're actually building. You are not building storage. Storage implies you are solving a space problem. And your customer does not have a space problem. They have a driveway they are not allowed to use. You are building a permitted, screened, fenced, insured place to park a large object that a rule has evicted from somewhere else. That is the product. The gravel is just the surface it happens on, which means the two numbers that decide this business are both invisible from the road. The first is what share of your dirt sits inside a rentable rectangle, which was determined the day someone drew the site plan and cannot be changed afterward. The second is how many households near you are forbidden from parking at home, which was determined by people you have never met and can be changed without asking you. Everything else, the rate, the fence, the cameras, the gravel, is downstream of those two. The lot stores vehicles. The ordinance creates the customers. Confuse the two, and you'll buy 5 acres of very well-organized dirt in a place where nobody actually needs it.